Hello, my friend. Welcome to How to Like Your Life, a brain training podcast for mindset transformation. I am so glad that you are here today. I'm Emilie. I'm a brain training specialist and a hypnosis practitioner, here to teach you how to harness your own inner power using the magic and science of brain training and self-hypnosis to transform your life and like your life. So let's dive in. In today's little bonus episode, I wanted to share my story with you. I get a lot of people asking how my job came to be in my life and how a musical theater actor could pivot into brain science. And it's actually a very personal story. I got into it for very, very desperate and personal reasons. And before we get into all of that, there's also another reason I'd like to share this story with you. The story of how I learned to like my life. Because when you listen to other folks sharing stories of transformation and sharing stories of really making drastic changes in their lives, your brain is actually starting to perceive that it's possible for you. Our brains really need evidence that something is possible before we attempt it. So before I dive into my own story, I want to share another little story from the 1950s that will show you just how true this is. Now, before the 1950s, the world thought that it was physically, humanly impossible for someone to run under a 4-minute mile. They thought no one could do it. They thought it wasn't in our anatomy and that it just couldn't be done. And then on May 6th, 1954, a man named Roger Bannister broke that record. He ran just under a 4-minute mile, defying everyone's expectations. He did it. And while that is amazing in itself, the mind-blowing part of this story is what follows. Just 46 days after Roger Bannister broke that record, another man named John Landy broke that 4-minute barrier again and ran faster than Roger Bannister. And then a year after that, 3 runners broke that 4-minute barrier in a single race. And since then, more than 1,000 runners have done it. And they've broken a barrier that they used to think was out of reach for human ability. And while this tells us, of course, that the human body is very strong and capable, more importantly, it shows us that when we see what is possible for our lives, we're more likely to do it. We have evidence that it can be done. Because the only change that happened within these runners is that they saw that it was possible. So as I share my own story, I'd like you to start imagining what transformations are possible for you, what areas of your life you might begin to like more and more, and let that act as evidence that you can do it too, because you absolutely can. So here is my story. When I was young, I was a really, really shy kid. I was very quiet, very reserved, to the point where I would hide under the table when a waitress came to take our order at a restaurant. We know now that this is undiagnosed autism, but I was very, very quiet. And then I was introduced to theater and music in school, and it opened something up within me. I started coming out of my shell and figuring out what I loved. And I really attribute that to the power of art and story and really harnessing our imagination to share parts of ourselves that we might not feel comfortable sharing in a more straightforward, literal sense. And we'll get back to this. This is important, I promise. So I got very into musical theater. I did all of the musicals in school growing up. And I realized that that was something I really, really wanted for a career. So I studied theater and vocal performance in undergrad at Muhlenberg College. And it was absolutely amazing. It was so inspiring and it was terrifying. It was also anxiety-inducing. It was also exhausting. And I loved my college experience, but I overworked my system to the point where I would have a cappella rehearsals until 1:30 in the morning and wake up for ballet class at 8 a.m. the next day. My body was not getting the rest it needed. My mind was not getting the kindness that it needed. I was really hard on myself and I worked really, really hard in school. And while I loved everything I was doing, it was too much. And so by the end of my college career, I got really, really sick. For a while, I didn't know what was wrong. I was absolutely exhausted through my senior year. I started developing all these weird new symptoms and severe anxiety on top of that. And fortunately, I was able to graduate. But by the time I finished school, I was so sick that the idea of getting on a stage didn't seem possible for me. I just kept getting worse and worse. The fatigue was debilitating. and disabling. I had severe migraines, chronic pain. I was developing new food allergies each day. And I got to a point where I was practically bedbound. The act of taking a shower would wipe me out for the rest of the day. So it was pretty bad. It was a really hard time in my life. I also developed depression on top of all of that because I was losing hope. And at the time, I was seeing so many doctors and specialists trying to figure out what was wrong. And I eventually learned after a long time that I had chronic fatigue syndrome and POTS. And if you know anything about those conditions, you'll know that the medical community considers them incurable. So doctors were telling me that I would be sick for the rest of my life and that I would just have to manage it. And so my stubborn self started looking elsewhere for answers. I started researching holistic approaches and other alternative options to improve my health. And my holistic health coach at the time introduced me to a protocol of brain training and self-hypnosis that's designed specifically to overcome chronic mystery illnesses and syndromes like what I had. And when I first looked at it, I thought it was BS. It looked like this miracle drug, snake oil, fake thing because these testimonials were unbelievable. I literally did not believe them. People with POTS talked about living their life in a wheelchair to roller skating within 4 months. People with chronic fatigue syndrome reported that they went from being entirely bedbound to hiking the Appalachian Trail. People with fibromyalgia were reporting no pain, and I didn't understand how this was possible. And at the same time, I had no other options. And as I was watching these testimonials, of course, I was doubtful of its effectiveness and truth in it. But as we know from the Roger Bannister story, the more we take in stories of other people achieving what we want to achieve, the more we start to believe it's possible. So eventually, I decided to invest in the program. And I gave it my all. And, brain training is like training the body. We will say that a lot on this podcast. The more we show up to strengthen our bodies at the gym, the stronger we will get. And in the same way, the more we engage in brain training tools and self-hypnosis tools, the faster our brains are going to change. So this program required an hour a day of brain training exercises. It was pretty intense. They suggest that people use these tools for at least 6 months. And of course, my autistic brain took that as literally as possible. So I did exactly an hour every single day. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you that I was about 50% better within 2 weeks. In a matter of days, my panic attacks went away. I'd been having panic attacks every single day before that point. My energy was gradually coming back. I found myself getting my life back so quickly. And of course, it takes a varied amount of time depending on who you are. But for me, it was almost instant. And I went from being bedbound and exhausted by walking up 1 flight of stairs to walking 5 miles a day, feeling great. And while this podcast is not about healing chronic conditions, I just want to offer a disclaimer here because when people talk about programs like this, folks assume that this is claiming that it's all in your head. It's absolutely not. Illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, POTS, long COVID, IBS, MCAS, etc., are very real physiological illnesses in the body. And the reason why brain training is effective in treating these illnesses is because it is neurological, not psychological. So you are not creating these symptoms in your head. They are real. They are in your body. And brain training helps to signal changes in the brain and the body to facilitate healing. The basic idea from the programs out there that take this approach is that these neuroimmune conditioned syndromes, like the ones I listed, are actually a result of some sort of trauma to the brain and intense nervous system dysregulation. And these traumas could be psychological, like chronic stress, which is likely what I experienced. It could be physical trauma, like a lot of folks with chronic pain. It could be viral or bacterial trauma, like people with chronic Lyme disease or long COVID, and so on and so forth. And the way that brain training works is that it provides the brain and body new experiences of safety to pull a person out of a chronic stress response, a chronic trauma response that allows the body an opportunity to heal and recover and return to a place of regulation. By calming and soothing the nervous system, And it creates a healing environment in the mind, in the brain, and in the body physiologically. Now, we could take a much, much deeper dive into this whole phenomenon of how these illnesses come about and how they heal. But for the sake of my story, I really wanted to emphasize that these brain training approaches are not suggesting that it's in your head. And in fact, brain training is very physical. It creates new neural pathways in the brain that send very real physical signals to the body and how it functions on a day-to-day basis. So, all of that to say, I got better. I got so much better after using brain training. And the benefits that I experienced went far beyond just the physical ones. Like I said, I stopped having panic attacks and I literally haven't had one since. And that was years ago. My depression went away. I started liking myself. I started really learning how to celebrate myself. I found that I had so much more mental clarity to the point where I have a memory about a week into doing that program where I was going for a walk and I realized that I didn't know what to think about because the last several years of my life had been totally engrossed by thinking about my symptoms, thinking about things I was worried about, ruminating on stuff that was making me anxious. And all of those things were melting away from my experience. And all of a sudden, I had space to create, to come up with new ideas. And I remember just thinking to myself, I feel so free right now. And I also found that when I got back on stage, I was more confident, I was more creative, I was more trusting of my instincts as an actor and a singer. I had tools to cope with challenges, and I started to really like my life. So naturally, I became obsessed with this possibility that we can use our own brains to feel the way we want to feel and live the way we want to live. And I just wanted to learn more and more and more. And what I was noticing was that the only programs and systems out there for people to retrain their brains in this way were primarily for sick folks. But as I experienced, these tools transcend far beyond healing and restoring the physical body. There is a gold mine of resources and practices that can help so many people become who they want to be and empower themselves. And how amazing is it that we can use our own brains to do that on our own? So naturally, it became my mission to spread this with the world, to share this message that you can change your own brain, you can like your life. So from there, I started my education. I was certified in positive psychology, positive neuroplasticity, and I started creating programs and sharing on social media. And the response that I kept getting was that people want practical approaches. There's so many books and podcasts and Instagram accounts out there where people talk about theories around mental health, but there's not enough of the how. How can we do this on our own each day in a way that's doable and rewarding? I also got certified in clinical hypnosis and ultimately got my master's degree in mind-body medicine with an emphasis in research and how the imagination can change the brain and change the body. And the rest is history. Somewhere along the way, I also got diagnosed with autism and ADHD, which explains a lot for so many reasons. We can do another episode on that. But ultimately, even though those years of being sick were horrible and scary, I would do it again. I am so grateful that I experienced that because on the other side of it, I learned how to like my life. Because before I was sick, I enjoyed the things that I was doing, but I was chronically stressed, chronically anxious, insecure. I didn't know how to believe in myself. And now I'm so grateful for these tools that will carry me through the rest of my life, and these tools that I can now share with you to help you like your life. And it was just all worth it, you know? And for those of you who are curious, I am also a performer and an actor and a singer still, and I'm so grateful to be able to explore both of my passions and have these parallel trajectories for my life. So I will be getting on stage again here and there in a way that supports my well-being. And I also really see these two careers as really closely linked. While from the outside, it might seem like art and science are so vastly different, both of these things involve using the imagination to transform how we feel. In acting, I embody a character and tell a story that impacts how I feel and how the audience feels and has a call to action to process things about the world in a different way. And in hypnosis, I am also telling a story and using imaginative circumstances to help people transform their brains based on the goals that they have. It's the same thing. Our imaginations are so unbelievably powerful. And I can't wait to show you in this podcast, in these future episodes, just how much power you have to transform how you feel in your daily life. Because you can absolutely like your life. And if you are interested in starting to explore this on your own, if you want to start to see how your imagination can change how you feel about yourself, I have some amazing resources for you. First and foremost, I have a hypnosis app called Doddle, Doddle, that has tons and tons of guided hypnosis recordings that you can listen to for so many different areas of your life to help you channel your own inner strengths and your imagination to create very real changes in your brain. And this podcast, How to Like Your Life, is actually paired with Doddle. So there's a whole library within the Doddle app that is dedicated to pairing a hypnosis practice with each of the episodes in How to Like Your Life. So as you are listening to these brain training tools and strategies, you can hop on over to Doddle and listen to a guided hypnosis recording to make it easier for you. So in this podcast, we're teaching you how to like your life, and in Doddle, it can make it a very easy task. And if you want to take a much, much deeper dive into how you can utilize brain training to reduce your stress, build your confidence, regulate your nervous system, increase your access to joy and creativity, and get in touch with the life that you want, I do host a 6-week masterclass called Hypnotic Empowerment several times throughout the year. It's a live 6-week course with live group calls and replays if you can't make it live. There's video lessons, there's daily brain training exercises, there's guided hypnosis recordings, a private community forum, and so many amazing resources to really walk you step by step through the process of changing your brain to like your life. All this information will be in the show notes so that you can check out when the next cohort will be. And for those of you who are experiencing chronic illness like what I've described, first and foremost, I see you, I love you, and secondly, most importantly, it is possible to recover. I believe that so deeply, and I'll link some resources in the show notes for you to check out, because it is so possible to transform your life, to transform your mind, to like yourself and like your life. No matter who you are, no matter what your life looks like now, it's possible to change your brain. It has been such an honor and a privilege to share my story with you. If you have been inspired or learned something from this episode, please leave a review wherever it is you are listening, because reviews are so helpful for creators like me to reach more folks. Share this episode with your friends. And it's been so great chatting with you today. I'll talk to you next time. Bye, friend.